Today's objective is to be able to use midpoint and distance formula. And yesterday we took a quiz, so if you didn't finish the day prior, you're finishing that today. Okay, you should have already done that, hopefully. And hopefully you've turned in all 3 assignments: notation, segment and angle addition, and construction assignments. They are over here off to the left on this sliding whiteboard, labeled 1, 2, and 3. That's what they look like if you need a visual, okay? And you should have began, meet me halfway, and if you hadn't, here we go with this, okay? So, on number 1, okay, you are supposed to give me these coordinates. So let's do a quick recap of coordinates, okay? What comes first, x or y on a coordinate? X before y, like the alphabet, alphabetical order, right? And x is which direction? Up, down, or left, right? From left to right, which is horizontal, right? So x is horizontal, x goes first, and then y is what? Up and down, vertical, right? So, most people, when they give me their coordinates, forget a couple things. First of all, some people forget x before y. So please remember, it's left and right before up and down. And then another thing people forget is the negative sign. So y'all tell me, on the x-axis, which way is negative? Your left, right? And on the y-axis, which way is negative? Down, right? So, when you're counting, if you ever count down or left, you must put a negative sign or it's going to give you the wrong answer, okay? So on letter A, what is the coordinates of A? -4, -1. Okay, B, and everyone's staying focused with me, right? So letter B is what? -4, 3. Does everyone see how you're always giving me an X and a Y? Now, on this one, it's simple enough to be able to count where the midpoint is, right? So, halfway between A and B, if I just count, that's 4 units. So I count up 2 units, which is half. There's my midpoint. What are the coordinates of that midpoint? Okay, -4, 1. Cool. Let's try the next one. E. What are the coordinates of E? -3 to the left, -3 down. Okay, -3, -3. What about F? Okay, goes 4 to the right, so it's +4, down 3, so 4, -3. And now I want to find the midpoint. Now, real quick, how many units long is EF? 7, correct. Now, half of 7 is what? 3.5, okay? There is no whole number middle. So guess what? Our midpoint is not going to be on the grid perfectly, okay? So again, half of 7, I'm going to count from E over 1, 2, 3, and a half. Your midpoint has to be exactly in the middle. So it's not on 0, it's not on 1. It's at 0.5. So my X value is 0.5. My Y value is what? -3, right? Okay, and then for P and for N, so P, let me just get this real quick. What is the coordinates of P? -3, -1. N, 4, 3. And now I want to find the midpoint. Now, real quick, if you can think of this right here, if you can find half of X from left to right and find half of Y up and down, where those cross will be your midpoint, okay? So from P all the way across, again, that's 7 units, so halfway is right here. Vertically, that's 4 units, so the half of that is right here. And where do those cross? That's the midpoint, okay? Half of the X, half of the Y, wherever they cross is the midpoint. So what are the coordinates of that? 0.5, comma, 1. Okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, that's just visually finding a midpoint, but you don't always have the luxury of a graph, though you could always graph your own. Sometimes you're just given the points in a sentence, okay, like you'll see on number 2. So before we get to number 2, we need what's called the midpoint formula. So let's go ahead and write the midpoint formula over here, okay? So the midpoint formula is M equals, big parentheses, x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2, parentheses. Everyone is writing that down. Okay, in that box off to the right. Writing down that midpoint formula. Right. So, here we go. On number 2, it says find the midpoint of the segment with endpoints. This is going to be important, okay? We are given 2 endpoints. So all we're going to do is add up our x's and divide by 2, and then we're add up our y's and divide by 2. And today we grabbed calculators on the way in because we're going to be able to use the calculator to do it, okay? So, you tell me on these 2 points, what is x1 and x2? What do you think? Okay, so 8 and 2 are my x values, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add my x values, 8 plus 2, and then put it over 2. Okay? Everyone's getting this down. Right? So, now here's one thing I want you to add, okay? On the top of that parentheses, you have to add those numbers first. So, on top of that fraction. So what we're going to do is put parentheses around 8 plus 2. Make sure you have those parentheses. Here's why, okay? You can use the calculator to do this in one step. But if you use the calculator, it will give you the wrong answer if you don't use parentheses. So I'm going to show you that now. If you take a look at your calculator, you can press the on button, hit new document, number 1. Do not save ever. And number 1, add a calculator. I want you to try this. Try typing in, what is it again? 8 plus 2 divided by 2 without parentheses. 8 plus 2 divided by 2. That gives me 9. If you don't actually type the parentheses, do you see that it gave me 9? It only divided the 2 by 2, right? But when I type it in, if I use parentheses, which are on the left side right here, 8 plus 2, and the parentheses, then divided by 2, that will give you 5. Okay? So calculators are great if you use them correctly. Okay? Oh, from the beginning. Yes. So if you started with control divide, you could put the 8 plus 2 on top, go down, and put 2. Another way. So, now, what we're going to do, we're going to write that down. Please. Here we go. So we got 5. That's not the final answer. That's just the x value. So let's do the same thing with our y's. I'll do it in blue. What are my 2 y values? 7 and negative 5. Remember, I'm going to add them. 7 plus negative 5 divided by 2. Again, if you can add that in your brain and then divide by 2, that's fine. Okay? But if you want to use your calculator, it would be parentheses 7 plus negative 5 parentheses divided by 2. And I hope everyone knows the difference between minus and negative, right? Does everyone see these red buttons on the screen? They're different things. Don't type them like that, but you got to know which one's a minus sign and which one's a negative sign, right? So we got 1. Now, real quick, the answer is not either of those numbers by themselves. It's together as a coordinate. So here's how I would write my answer. Midpoint equals parentheses 5, 1. I got an x, I got a y. Those coordinates, that is the answer for the midpoint. So if you were to graph all 3 of these points, you would see 5, 1 is smack in the middle of that segment, okay? Let's try to get on number 3. Number 3. So, what are my x values? Negative 10 and 1. So parentheses, negative 10 plus 1 divided by 2. Now, if you type it in the calculator, it's going to give you a fraction. So let's try this together. Negative 10 plus 1 divided by 2. Now, does anyone know how to get from a fraction to a decimal in your calculator? Okay, so you do press Control Enter. So Control's up here. Yours is yellow. I think mine's blue. Control Enter. Negative 4.5. Let's write that down. And then my y value. My y's are 2 and negative 7. So I'm going to add them. 2 plus negative 7 divided by 2. If you do that, you should get negative 5 over 2, which is what? Negative 2.5. What's my final answer going to be? The midpoint equals negative 4.5, comma, negative 2.5. Okay? So any questions on finding midpoint with 2 endpoints? Okay. Now, again, I want to stress, these are given 2 endpoints, numbers 2 and 3, right? Now, let's look at 4 and 5. How is it different? So it says it, right? 4 has 1 endpoint and the midpoint. So who thinks we're going to do the exact same thing? Okay, good. So we're not going to do the exact same thing. There is a way to do this algebraically, okay? And then there's a way to do it intuitively or by differences. So I'm going to show you the differences method. I can show you later the algebraic way if that interests you, okay? But here's how we're going to do this. We're going to make a little diagram. We have a segment with 2 endpoints and a midpoint. So I'm going to draw myself a segment with 2 endpoints and a midpoint. So E stands for endpoint, M stands for midpoint. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a little space, and I'm going to write my first endpoint, negative 5, negative 3. Okay. And then for the midpoint, leave a little space. We're going to write 1, comma 3. Okay. Now let's think about this. We know the midpoint is smack in the middle of a segment, right? So if I can figure out the difference between this endpoint and this midpoint, I know the difference from this midpoint to this endpoint is going to be the exact same. So what we're going to do is what we call like bird beaks. We're going to figure out these differences, and then we're going to do the same difference right here. Okay? So let's think about this. From negative 5 on the end to positive 1. What's the difference to get from negative 5 up to 1? What? 6 6. Okay, and it's going up, right, from -5 up to 1. So right here, go ahead and put a little +6. So guess what I'm going to do next? The same difference. I'm going to add 6 again. So what is 1 plus 6? 7. Do you see how you're figuring out half, and then you do it again? Okay? Let's try it on the y side. I'll do it in blue. How do I get from -3 up to +3? From here to here. It's what? Positive. It is +6 again, coincidentally, but think about it. -3 up to 0 is 3, up to 3 again is 6, right? So this is also a +6. They're not always going to match like that, but in this one, they're the same. So guess what I'm going to do down here? The same thing, +6. +6. What is 3 plus 6? 9. So my final answer, 7, 9 for my endpoint, okay? So the endpoint, 7, 9. Okay? Now, I don't know if you like that method, but I will say the algebraic method, I see more errors when people do it. Some people say it's harder, but you might like it better. I can show you another time, okay? Well, let's try number 5 this way, okay? The diagram way, we'll call it. Number 5, when I read it, it says 1 endpoint and the midpoint. So I know I'm doing the same thing, okay? So let's draw our little diagram. And then I want to label my endpoint and my midpoint. -3, 4. Now, when I write -1.5, I'll be doing -1.5, okay? Comma 1. Now, if you're ever not sure what the difference between these two numbers is, let me tell you what you do. You take that midpoint number and subtract the endpoint number. So think about -1.5 minus -3. -1.5 minus -3. That is an increase of 1.5 from here to here. That's plus 1.5. Again, how did I get that number? This midpoint number minus the endpoint number, okay? So if I added 1.5 to get to this number, what am I going to do right here? Same thing, plus 1.5, -1.5, plus 1.5 is straight up 0. On the y side, I'm going from 4 down to 1. So 3 is the right number, but it's going to be minus sign 3 this time, okay? Okay, so since I'm subtracting 3, again, 1 minus 3 is -2. So, how do we write our final answer? The endpoint equals 0, -2, okay? Make sure you have written that down, get it down real quick, and then flip it over. Y'all can already start number 6. You're just counting units. So I'll give you a minute. Try number 6 to count those units. This is distance. Okay? Try number 6 for a second. All right. If you didn't finish it, you can catch up on it another time. Sorry. So on number 6, you're counting AC. So all you got to do is count units. How many units is AC? Okay, 9. What about BD? 4. What about EF? 8. And then what about GH? Okay, so if you are counting horizontally or vertically, you can just count the units, okay? However, if it's not vertical or horizontal, we can't just count units like this. We're going to have a formula, and that's why down here we have a formula. Now, you don't have to write it yourself, but I do want you to box it, okay? So put a box around this distance formula right here, off to the right, okay? So again, over here off to the right, does everyone see what the distance formula is? It says distance equals square root x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay? Now, I'm going to label this real quick. Whenever you have 2 points and you're looking for the length, or if it ever says the phrase how far, or if it ever says the word distance, those are the situations where you're going to need to use the distance formula. How far, distance, and then length, okay? So, whenever you have these, x1 is right here, x2 is right here, y1 is right here, y2 is right here, okay? So we're going to use those numbers, and we're going to write it in this formula, okay? Everyone with me? So let's write this down. I want you to write distance equals, and I want you to put a long square root, okay? This equation is kind of long. Then what comes in our equation is parentheses. Now, what's x2 here? 4. What's x1? Negative 4. Notice we're subtracting them. So I'm going to write 4 minus negative 4. End the parentheses. Now you may have learned subtracting a negative is like addition, which is fine. So if you want to turn the minus and the negative into a plus sign, you can do that. But I'm going to leave it, because this is going to be a calculator thing. I'm just going to type it in and get my answer. So whether you change it to a plus or leave it as a minus negative, you'll get the same answer. Okay? What comes after the what comes after the parentheses right here? Square. Don't forget the square. Okay, then we're going to put plus sign, parentheses. What's y2 and y1? 9 and 3. So I'm going to do 9 minus 3, parentheses, squared. Okay? So when it comes to distance between 2 points, I have to see you write out the equation. If you don't write out the equation, that's the only work I require. Because now you can just type it all in the calculator. So let's do this together. We're going to type square root. So let's go ahead and get to our, I like to make things fresh. So I'm going to go on, new document, don't save, add a calculator, okay? Or you could just do it where you have it on the calculator. But everyone, we need to type square root. Does everyone know where square root is? Okay? So it's right next to the 4. It's kind of small. You have to press Control X squared. Okay? So does everyone have square root on their calculator? Because you're following along and you're typing what I'm typing. Square root. Now, what's next in our equation? Before 4, it's a parentheses. Okay? So let's type parentheses over here off to the left. And now we're going to type our numbers, right? It's going to be 4 minus negative 4. So does everyone know where the minus sign is? Off to the right, and the negative sign over here further to the left, okay? Those are different. So 4 minus negative 4, parentheses squared, and then plus parentheses 9 minus 3 squared. I would like for everybody to type it in just like that, hit enter, and make sure you get what I get. Because if you don't, you typed it in wrong, okay? So did you get 10? All right, so any questions on this? What's up? So negatives to the left of enter. Yeah, but you have to have parentheses. Is everyone able to find squared? It's this button next to 4 with the x squared on it, right? So let's write that down. 10, distance equals 10. Okay. Let's try to write down the next one, number 9. So on our equation, we're going to write what first? Distance equals, okay, big square root. First thing we always put is parentheses. What am I going to write here? 2 minus negative 3. Okay? Parentheses. And then what do we have to put after the parentheses? Squared. Okay, good question. So does the order matter? In the end, it doesn't in this one because it's going to square. Okay? But in general, you always want to just follow the pattern. So in general, if I were you, I would just keep it this one minus this one minus this one. Okay? Because sometimes the order matters. This time, when you square it, it'll always give you what you need. Okay? So 2 minus negative 3 squared plus parentheses. What minus what? 3 minus negative 7 parentheses squared. Okay, let's see if we can type that in together, right? See if we get the same thing. So everybody's doing this. Square root, parentheses, 2 minus negative 3 squared, plus 3 minus negative 7 squared. Okay. So this time we're going to get a decimal, 11.18. We're going to round 2 decimal places. So the 1/8, the 0 after the 8 makes it stay 8. So 11.18 is what I got for my distance. Does anyone have any questions on how to get that? Or did you get something wrong? Okay, let's do 10 real quick. Now, we always want to read it. 8 and 9, we're just finding length and finding distance. But look at 10. How is 10 different? AB has an endpoint and a midpoint. Now, you tell me, how much of that segment is from the end to the middle? What do we call that section from the end to the middle? Okay, so this halfway, sorry. We don't have to guess that. Do y'all know that from the end to the middle is halfway? Okay. I feel bad for the people who have to listen to this in the future. No. So again, from the end to the middle is half. I'm going to teach this to you today as freshmen, sophomore, juniors, whatever you are. From the end of anything to the middle of anything is half. You've got to know that, okay? Okay, so moving on. So from the end to the middle, it is what it is. This is half, okay? I hope you study that fervently because I'm kind of floored that y'all don't know this. From the end of anything to the middle of anything is always half. Now, if we are to find that distance, that wouldn't be the whole distance because it's only half, right? So don't fail me now. What do I do with half to get a whole? Okay, you add another half, or another way to think about it is you just multiply it by 2, okay? So in the end, we're going to take this half, and we're going to times it by 2. So I'm telling you, class, whenever you are in a situation where you have the end and the middle, go ahead and find the distance, because that's what it says, right? Find the measure, that's distance. But since it's the whole thing, you're going to have to multiply the answer by 2 at the very end. So we are doing distance. Last step, times 2. Let's do it. So distance, d equals big old square root. Okay, and then x2 minus x1, 5 minus negative 1 squared, plus y2 minus y1, so 6 minus 3 squared. All right, so all of y'all are able to write that down and then type it in, right? So let's type that in. So here we go. Square root, parentheses, 5 minus negative 1, parentheses squared, plus, parentheses, 6 minus 3 squared, parentheses squared. So see if you get what I got, 6.71 if we round it, right? However, remind me, that is how much of it? Thank you. Half. So, what do we do with a half to get a whole? Times 2. So, you can do it right here. Times 2. Okay, and I get 13.42. Okay, because it rounds up. The 6 makes the 1 go up. So, 13.42 is my final answer, okay? Okay, because I did 6.71 times 2. Okay. Okay, so you're going to use this information on your assignment today. I'm going to pass that out.